Hi, we're going to be discussing today whether you're studying a programming language or whether you're studying programming concepts. And this is something that I'm putting together for my students at Passaic County College, but my hope is that maybe somebody else can benefit from this as well. So basically at Passaic County, we will study a programming language called Python. And why did we settle on Python? Well, the answer is, first of all, it's a very versatile language. It has a lot of uses. Something that you can use if you're doing programming on things like Raspberry Pi, which is a little hardware device that you can use to do all sorts of cool stuff. It's something you can use for web programming. You can use it to develop applications. You can use it as a network administrator. It's something that has a lot of purposes. So that's one of the big things. And right now, as of June 2020, it is currently the most popular language, mainly because of that versatility. Another big thing, and especially when we're talking about an intro to programming course, and some of the students taking this course, your math majors, your engineers, we don't want to overwhelm you with crazy amounts of complex looking stuff. Python, one of its hallmarks is that it is a relatively simple language. It may not always feel that way throughout the semester, but trust me, there are some majorly complicated languages out there. I'm looking at you, Perl. I love Perl, but it's a very difficult language to read if you're a new person. So then the question is, if we're studying Python, what else is out there? And we could go on and list hundreds of languages, and I'm not even making that up, literally hundreds of languages. But some of the major players you might hear about if you talk to a friend who's taking a class elsewhere, languages like Java. Java is a very popular language. There's a number of different flavors, if you will, of C. There's C, there's C++, there's C#, which is the one with the pound sign. There's Objective-C. These are all going to be versions of the C++ language that we are going to have out there and available. Swift is used for mobile development. That's becoming very popular in that regard. It's growing very quickly. Developed by Apple. If you're doing web programming, you're going to find things like JavaScript, PHP, Ruby. Those languages will be out there. With databases and data analysis, things like structured query language or SQL will be out there. If you're doing data analysis, R is a language. Engineers might use MATLAB. And believe it or not, even Excel has some basic programming capabilities in it. So there are going to be a lot of those options out there. So this is a very small subset of it. I'm going to put a link in the description to some of the more common languages if you want to check what is current. As I said, this is July 2020, so who knows, something brand new might come out 3 minutes after I make this video. So we've got a big list here, and there's a bunch more we're not talking about. So in a course like this, what are you learning is really the question. And we're trying to teach you programming concepts through Python. So effectively, a lot of the stuff that we are going to talk about, the way you issue certain commands to the computer, it's going to change a little bit if we're doing C++ or Java or Python. They're going to be a little bit different, but the main ideas are going to be the same. And some of those ideas would be, first of all, variables and data types. This is stuff we will talk about in this class. We'll talk about the difference between integers versus decimal numbers versus characters versus Boolean. Boolean is going to be a true or false. We'll talk about the idea of selection. Selection is going to be allowing a computer to make a decision. If statements are very common there. If the user's input is equal to yes, do one thing, otherwise do something completely different. So there are a number of different ways you can do that. But again, those languages we talked about earlier, they have this capability. Looping. Looping is going to be the ability to run the same piece of code multiple times. That's going to be something that we would utilize if we are really looking to be more efficient. Instead of having to rewrite, retype the same code or do things like that, you can find a way to say run the same chunk of code 5, 6, 10, 400 times. We'll talk about in this class lists and arrays. Basically, like you might have a shopping list where you have one physical sheet of paper and then you have 5, 6, 7 things on that list that you want to bring with you. That would be something that you can do in these languages. It's effectively like creating one variable that's going to store multiple values. That'll be probably towards the end of the semester. The other thing is the way we are able to reuse our programming, reuse our code. There are going to be some languages that are a little more geared towards something called object-oriented programming. There will be some geared more towards functional programming. For an intro class, we're not going to get too far into that, but certainly, depending on what industry you're going into, those are going to be important concepts. So, if all this stuff is the same, what's different? First of all, the most obvious thing would be the way we type the commands. I didn't put that here, but the way you would declare or create a variable in one language is going to look different than in another language. There's the concept of whether a language is compiled versus interpreted. If you take a program like, let's say Microsoft Word, you're not able to see Microsoft's source code for that. But with Python programs, which are interpreted, you would have the source code and you can make those changes to the source code. Versus a program like Microsoft Word is going to be compiled where all you get is an executable or program that you're able to run to make that happen. Sounds counterintuitive, but some languages are going to be harder to learn than others. With great power comes great complexity. If I can, steal and modify something from Spider-Man. Programming languages like Perl, which was one of my first loves, they're very, they have some very powerful stuff, but it also makes it very difficult to learn those languages. Some languages are much better with memory and resources than others. In the 90s, 80s, this was a lot more important maybe than it is now. I think we can kind of get away with being a little less efficient than we had to. Even when I was in college, it was much more of a focus. But the efficiency of the language is certainly something that is still a difference. And then, again, for an intro class, we're not going to get too far into this, but the idea of object-oriented versus functional programming. Basically, it's going to be the way we set up code to be reused in the future. So it's going to be something where we can declare functions, we can declare methods, but again, without a little more background, it's tough to give you too much on that, but there are different approaches. Now, what do I know? I hear that a lot, but in terms of programming, I've gone through a lot of languages in my time. So in school, and this is putting aside, I took a course called Fundamentals of Programming Languages, and I think we used about 15 languages in that course. But here's a list. I started with BASIC in high school, and I moved on to Pascal. When I went to college at Montclair State University, we started with C. We switched over to C++, probably around my junior year. In my time there, I learned SQL and assembly language as kind of, co-curricular types of things. Other courses in my major. For those of you going into computer science, you'll take, the more modern version of assembly language is computer organization, where you start to see some of that really low-level programming. And if you think Python's bad, assembly language is very difficult. Other languages that I moved on to in college, I went to Java. I also found a lot of use for some programming projects in Perl as well. And again, that's putting aside the programming languages course where, we did some Fortran, we did PL1, we did Lisp, we did Analog. Like, there were so many languages that I was exposed to. And it really took me to the, my senior year to really understand what I'm telling you here, that it really isn't so much important that I'm an expert in C or I'm an expert in C++. I want to be versatile when I go out into the workforce. Now, professionally, the first thing I actually got paid for was doing web pages, and that was JavaScript and HTML, hypertext markup language. You'll find that people will argue over whether that's a programming language or not, but let's just go with it. My first real job, I was doing C++ programming. I did a little bit of database work, which was done in SQL. The next company I worked at was a defense contractor, and I moved into a language called Ada, which is not very commonly used. Literally, my boss gave me a manual and said, you're a computer science guy, you'll pick it up. And, sure enough, I did. That was the, computer science background. Okay, how do I do an if statement in Ada versus the languages I'm familiar with? From there, I also did some stuff in Perl and even, batch files in DOS. Kind of dates me a little bit there. From there, I moved on and I started teaching at Passaic County College. I started teaching programming in QBasic in 2001 or so. I went into other languages, including Java. I've taught Java. I've taught ActionScript, which is something that's built into Adobe's Flash program. It's now called Animate, but ActionScript was another thing that I have taught there. They've kind of moved a lot of that to HTML5 at this point, but it kind of was its own separate language for a while. And most recently, I've added Python to my repertoire. So the next question is, well, okay, there's so many of these, which one is the best? And it depends. I mentioned Perl. I love Perl, but Perl is also a resource hog. It's not a very efficient program. So that's certainly something to be aware of. What type of system are you running on? How efficient do you need to be? Even what is the expertise of your programming team? These are all important considerations. So there's no one answer. If there was, there wouldn't be hundreds of languages out there. So in summary, for what we're talking about, first of all, you want to focus on not only how do I write these things, but what am I learning how to do. It's not only how do I declare a variable in Python, but how do I declare variables? Why am I declaring them? What does that mean? Those things will translate between any language that you might be using. You want to be versatile. It's something that has served me well. The ability to pick up and use a new language with very little training is a very valuable skill. And the other thing is be a lifelong learner. Even in a teaching role, it was like, I had taught as QBasic, we switched over to Visual Basic, and I hadn't taught that, and then we switched over to Python, and, even for me, it was like, well, oh my gosh, I gotta learn a new language. And, you learn a new language. And you can see from my history, I've gone through a lot of languages, and I doubt that Python is going to be the last language I learn for teaching purposes. And, honestly, that's a good thing. It keeps you fresh. It keeps you challenged. It's just, you will find yourself writing the code in the wrong language at some point if you go into computer science. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of background as to whether you're really studying programming or you are studying Python. The answer is kind of both. So just don't make the mistake of thinking that the only thing you have to learn is Python. It's really, especially at our college, this is a prerequisite to higher level courses. And the idea is the more of these concepts you absorb, the easier going into higher level classes will be. So hopefully this helps, and I'm certain I'll have another video out at some point for you.